our guests, and especially like to welcome to the table Greater Wellington Councillor Thomas Nash, Chair of the Transport Committee. Nice to have you around this table. And I'll go straight to Liam.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome everyone. So there was a series of emails I popped out late last week just preparing you for this week. We've got a session today, a session tomorrow, and a session with Greater Wellington on Thursday, just rolling out three key projects for today anyway: the Wellington City Transport Plan, the Golden Mile bus capacity analysis. We've got some Greater Wellington staff here to talk to that in detail, and a progress update on the Harbour Quays and the Eastern Connections project. The format for today will involve a little bit of a workshop because we're interested in getting your feedback on the content of the Wellington City Transport Plan. Sean and the team will take you through that session after he introduces the project, I suppose. And then we'll hand over to Tim, and Tim's going to talk from Greater Wellington about the capacity analysis we did on the Golden Mile. And I'll be able to introduce also Tamsin Evans, who's just started with us, who's running the Harbour Quays and Eastern Connections project. So this was circulated at the 27th of August briefing. This was the agenda for the upcoming briefings. We've had one, of course, which was the design drop-in on the Golden Mile, also held in public. And today is really about, as I said, the WCTP, the Wellington City Transport Plan, and the Rapid Transit Bus Corridor projects, Harbour Quays and Eastern Connections. Tomorrow we've got a briefing on the Central City projects. I talked a little bit at the Golden Mile update around where those projects came from. They were the City Streets Let's Get Wellington Moving projects. I look forward to talking to you about that, but it's fair to say that I'm giving myself some space to understand those projects. It's 7.5 years in the making. We've just got on top of some of the detail around them. The ones that are popping for you, councillors, at WCC, of course, is the Dixon Street, Cuba Street, and City Connections, the bike connection between Kent and Cambridge and Te Aratupua. So we'll talk to those in detail tomorrow. This is the relevant resolution from the notice of motion for today's meeting. It's trying to, I guess, warm you guys up for the 26th of September briefing, which relates, of course, to this particular NOM. In particular, we've gone through and done the Golden Mile on the 27th. We're now at Resolution 2, which was a report back on a vision for the Integrated Transport Plan for the Central City. So this workshop's about helping us form that vision and bring it to you, and I believe now the date is the 26th of September. You'll also note we've got Wellington City Council staff members here today because we are doing an integrated piece on this, and also, of course, as the Chair's already welcomed, Thomas Nash from Greater Wellington Regional Council is here as well. We've been working quite closely with Greater Wellington on these suite of projects. Project oversight for this joint program of work. This is a diagram which explains how I've stood the team up to try to find our way through the Wellington City Transport Plan and these Harbour Quay projects and the Eastern Connections. I'm the program SRO. I've got a steering group that's got Sam Gain on it from Metlink and Luke Troy, and Siobhan Proctor as well from WCC. The program director is Tamsin. We'll introduce her shortly, and we've got a number of project managers that have been appointed. You'd see off to the side there, councillors, the independent advisory panel, and the names listed there. We have Greg and Alan here today, and I'm going to invite Greg to come up and introduce himself, and perhaps Alan as well. And as they do come up, I'll just quickly explain the idea behind this independent advisory panel. It's fair to say, as I said before, there's been a lot happening under Wellington, Let's Get Wellington Moving, 7 years in that project, and I've still been trying to, as I said, get some space so I can understand what came back to council and how we've been integrating that with our other transport initiatives. The independent advisory panel is to provide some assurance to council about some of the assumptions that we're making and some of the work we're doing in terms of resetting the transport vision for Wellington. And I think the expertise they bring will hold us in good stead as we go forward with this plan. We think it's about 12 to 18 months in the making. The panel itself has already been very valuable for staff and officers to challenge and ask us some difficult questions about some of our assumptions. I think they're already paying their dues, which I'm very, very fortunate about. But we're looking forward to working with them and for them to provide you with independent advice at certain stages of the Wellington City Transport Plan. So I'll hand over to you, Greg, to introduce yourself and Alan.
Thanks, Liam. Good afternoon, councillors. I think many of you, if not all of you, I know from previous interactions, but yeah, really pleased to be here helping council work through these really important strategic issues around the transport plan for the future of Wellington. It's early days, but I thought all we do just now is just quickly introduce ourselves. So I'm Greg Pollock. I've got a background in public transport and major infrastructure project delivery. I'm a town planner by background. I've lived in Wellington for about 20 years and have previously had roles with GW in Metlink and also on the operator side running public transport operations. And before that, yeah, as I say, involved in many large infrastructure projects over a number of years. So we've got a panel. Alan will introduce himself in a second, but the other members of the panel, Tim Wedmeyer, who's a bus infrastructure specialist or public transport infrastructure specialist based out of Brisbane with quite a bit of experience in some of the large infrastructure projects in that part of the world, which have been very successful, and also some recent experience here in Wellington. And Terry Rawnsley, who's an urban economist based out of Melbourne, who's with KPMG actually, and he's part of the team to help just again give us another perspective on some of the economic and business issues and behind transport. So that's me, and I'll let Alan introduce himself too.
Yeah, good afternoon, councillors. My name is Alan Kerr. I'm a transport planner. Believe it or not for my accent, I've actually lived in Wellington for longer than I've lived anywhere else. So my background is in mainly public transport and active travel, but I consider myself a multimodal transport planner. As well as working in consultancy as I do now, I've got previous experience with Transport for London and Transport for New South Wales. And yeah, I've been in Wellington for over 15 years now, so it's really great to be part of this panel and looking forward to getting involved.
I think that's probably all we'll say, Liam. I think other than to note that we're here to listen today, we've been engaged for a number of weeks now, but we're still getting up to speed. There's clearly a huge amount of work that's gone on from Let's Get Wellington Moving, even before those days, over the last few years, and so there's there's a lot to absorb, and there's obviously some changes happening. So we're looking forward to working with officers and councillors to provide some perspective on how that can be done as well as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Greg. And councillors, you'll note we've also been involving the panel in all of the background context here, so the Golden Mile briefing, all the materials that we've been pulling together from the Let's Get Wellington Moving program have also been scheduled and libraried for them to search. But again, lots of material that has been produced over those 7 years and lots of stuff to go through to better understand the dynamics of the city from a transport point of view. So now over to Sean. Sean's going to take you through where we are currently thinking with the Wellington City Transport Plan, and that will involve a little bit of a stand-up and workshop as well.
Thank you, councillors. So we'll just skip through these. We're going to come back to them when we do our exercise, assuming it ever moves. Moving along. Oh, for goodness sake. Sorry. Come on. It's as painful for me as it is for you. For goodness sake. Yeah, we just need, can we go to the transport planning bit, please? Sorry.
You just have to tell jokes while we wait for the slides to. No, you don't. You don't really, Sean.
Oh, good. As being a father of three, they're pretty terrible these days. Anyway. We just need to skip past these, Tian, to the beginning. Yep. Thank you. Can we make... All right. I'll start talking to it in the meantime, and we'll just catch up. So, during your debates about a notice of motion and the passing of those resolutions, pardon? Which notice of motion? The notice of motion to do with the Golden Mile and the ones Liam was referring to earlier. You discussed the need for a transport plan. And whilst there wasn't a decision to draft one, I thought we might look into the reasons why it might be a good idea to commission one. So, if we look at the strategic context we find ourselves in the LTP and its community outcomes, you affirmed the need to move more people with fewer vehicles. We also need to account for key decisions in the legislative, regulatory and investment made by Council and by our partner agencies. And you can see that through key decisions that are coming through the Transport GPS, public transport decisions that are being made at Greater Wellington. They're changing that operating context we're in, and it's a good idea to look at the frameworks we make our decisions under and what the content of our decisions is to make sure that we can continue to integrate those investments. We also need to make sure we've got the transport inputs needed for prioritisation in the forthcoming spatial plan. So we need to make sure that we understand the investments that are needed to be made in the transport system against investments that are needed in water, community facilities and the other infrastructures, so that we can coordinate planning and make sure that we're investing to both unlock capacity but also to maintain service levels in the long term. We also need to provide certainty to Wellingtonians about what is happening to their city. We also need to provide certainty to the other people who invest in our city, utility operators, investors, other transport providers. Against these changing contexts, you've also made some key decisions. During the district plan, you've allowed for an extra 73,000 odd additional units across the city. I'm not saying that we are building those. What I'm saying is there are now the zoning slots available for them to be consented. The Metro Councils have also gone through their own processes and enabled a further 132,000 additional units outside our city. There have been new government policy statements on transport that have established new projects and new investment logics. You're going to see announcements under the NLTF this afternoon on some of those investments. And there's been the dissolution of Let's Get Wellington Moving. Now, it's very tempting to think of Let's Get Wellington Moving as a single monolithic program, but in truth what it was a tapestry in which many different projects ended up being stitched into. So as we unstitch that means that certain things unravel and certain new positions will need to be come to. And if we look at what a successful transport plan does, if you look at a good transport plan, what you should be able to see is the reason why you do things, the reasons you are looking to achieve things, and you should still be able to see how streets work. You should be able to see how different futures are accounted for. You should be able to see the purposes you're investing for, and you should be able to see the people who are going to be using these networks. And by looking through the current organic system we have of policy documents, some of those things are very difficult to see. I think that's a fair comment. But as I have often told you, there is no good time to plan anything, largely because the only systems in which you can have perfect knowledge and architect perfectly are systems on the verge of death. That's not where our city is, and so we're going to have to plan around key uncertainties. I was told to behave myself. So there are still discussions that are being had within government about what happens to the future of ferries. We're always going to need a way across Cook Strait, but the land footprint of that infrastructure has key determinants about how our infrastructure fits into the national infrastructure picture and how particular areas of our city function. There are decisions to be taken by the end of the year inside the government about what happens with the Mount Victoria Tunnel and the Basin Reserve. That's important for not only understanding what happens to access to the east of the city, but depending on how those investments are made, also creates different conditions for north-south flow in the city. It also has long-term impacts on things like climate emissions pathways and how other policies work, even down to the parking policy. There is the Petone to Granada link road. That's been identified in the new land transport GPS, but we still don't know precisely the details of where it is to go and how it is to unlock the housing which the ministers have predicated that investment on. There is still the question of, in the long term, of MRT to the south and what that pathway may look like. There are the growing for growth reforms which are affecting land use and how the city develops in the longer term, and there are packages of legislation coming forward which we'll be coming to speak to you about with my planning hat on. And then there is the question of congestion charging. So the uncertainty with congestion charging is not necessarily whether a tool will happen. Government have already committed to that. The question is how that tool gets deployed and what it means for Wellington. So it could have very different impacts, say if you were to put a cordon around the central city to simply charging people at the borders of the city. And these are all details that make a big difference to the way networks function and the way tools are deployed. And so if we look at how that system works, the context you're in, the key document is the one at the top, the government policy statement on land transport. That effectively prioritises investment through the National Land Transport Fund. It also makes good on Crown aspirations. That flows down to the Regional Land Transport Plan, and that's where the local share through your LTP decisions gets apportioned. And then that goes back into the NLTP, the National Land Transport Plan. The other important thing to understand is to the left of this, you have the other budget appropriations. So these are appropriations that are paying for things like the overhaul of the Resource Management Act, things like new ferries, things like all those other decisions, like say what happens with schools and universities that affect the transport system. So one of the key things to bear in mind as we go back to what a successful transport plan looks like, you have to be able to see the role of transport in people's lives. So we still have to be able to understand the why that is coming from those other budget appropriations. If we take it down into a street, in Lambton Quay say, when we look at how these instruments actually function, you've got things like the district plan. So the district plan is why there aren't any car parks at ground level in the buildings in Lambton Quay. That's why they're up. That's why all the crossings to get into car parks are on the terrace because of the edge controls down there. It's also what requires things like verandas to be built to shelter pedestrians. You've got the Green Network Plan channeling investment into street trees and the greening of the city. Between the curbs, you have things like network operating frameworks, network operating plans, transport guidelines, codes of practice, your bike network plans, your mode plans that are determining what happens in that space. You've also got your parking policy for what happens when things stop in that space. You've got your walking network plans to look at how people move around on foot. You've got your bus network policy settings, which are setting how are you going to interface with the Regional Public Transport Authority and how are we going to provide for the levels of service on our network so that their networks will function properly. And you've also got the accessibility overlay of how do we make sure this works for everybody. So as you can see, what looked like a fairly simple street has become quite a complicated policy environment. And so this is where the architecture of a transport plan becomes important, because we need to understand the level of detail you're going to go into. So you're not going to change the district plan rules on car parking, say, through the transport plan, but what you can do is signal that that plan needs to change to meet new outcomes. And so what you've got to understand is, how are you going to, what is your transport plan going to do? At what level is it going to function? Are you still going to have mode plans underneath that, one for walking, one for cycling? And if you do that, how are they actually going to fit together? Because you've got to remember, no matter how you move, you do it in a street. And a street is a place. And we've only got one of them. So once we've used the space between the buildings, it's very expensive to create more. And so what we have are a series of decisions that are flowing in from the right there, from the left there, sorry. You've got your Central City Transport Vision, your Harbour Quays, Golden Mile, Eastern Busway, Southern Busway, these projects that are making decisions. They then come in through the lens of place, alongside of your mode decision, so that we can understand what the priorities are for each piece of space, essentially. And then that flows upwards into your transport plan, which gives you your network operating frameworks and your network operating plans. So basically, what are the priorities going to be for any given piece of street, and what is the order of those priorities? And then that goes up into your spatial plan. One of the key things the spatial plan does is it sits on top answering the when question. So within the transport plan, you're looking at the why. Why are we investing in this? What does success look like? You're looking at what do we need to buy? What do we need to invest in? What do we need to stop investing in? And where does it go? So, and then that happens for water and other infrastructure in parallel. And then in the spatial plan, we bring that together to make sure that the investments will fit together. And that's where we're trying to bring things like water investment into close proximity with transport funding, so that the project managers can then see the street and operate together so that the infrastructures are coordinated. And then that flows into your long-term plan for your funding decisions, through the long-term plan back up into the regional and national plans, and also things that can't be decided through your long-term plan go into your regulatory instruments. So, for example, if you're making decisions around, say, car parking in buildings or bike parking or something like that. And so some of the key questions my team have for you is, what should the geographic scope for this city transport plan be? Do you want something that covers the entirety of our jurisdiction? Do we want something that only covers the urban part, or do we want something that only covers the central city? We need to understand what the time horizon for the transport plan should be. Should we be looking out 50 years? But just bear in mind that as we look further, our eyesight becomes blurrier and the cone of uncertainty becomes greater. And so what we're going to ask you to do is we're going to spread out some component pieces on some tables. We're going to do a bit of a dot exercise and work out, what do you think should be into scope, what should be out of scope, and where your emphasis should be. We've got post-it notes because we haven't thought of everything, and you'll probably want to write something down. And
Sean, I did have a question from Councillor Pannett earlier, and I guess if there's any questions about, before we move into the workshop, this is the workshopy bit you're moving into now?
It is, but why don't we stop for questions?
Well, should we stop for questions on anything from the earlier presentation? So, Councillor Pannett.
And you looked at me as you said that. So, Sean, it's 2024 and I feel like I'm back in 2007. You have gone through a whole presentation, except for the Green Network Plan, without mentioning the environment, which is in crisis. So I guess I'm curious about where the thinking is at that we continue to do this.
So, Councillor, I have briefed you on how to make a transport plan. I have not said a single word about what should be in it.
The point is, even the framework, the components of it, where is the planet that we stand on in that? It's a serious question. And we've tried very, very hard to try and get urban form, transport, the environment together. And that's why I was worried about when there was a kind of an agreement to do a transport plan. I thought, oh dear.
Well, this is the point. This briefing is so that we can draft a paper to bring to you for a decision for a transport plan. So at the moment, what we're trying to understand is, what do you mean by that? And you have to bear in mind as well, I haven't been through how Te Atakura fits with this. I haven't been through how the district plan fits with this. What we've done is simply look at the question of how would you make a plan? We haven't yet decided on what sort of emissions pathway we will follow, any of that stuff.
Doesn't look like there are any other questions. So let's move on with the workshopy bit, Sean.
Good. Excellent. Yes. Cool. Vita's going to distribute some dots. We'll put out some pages, and if you've got anything you want to write down that we haven't thought of, I'll write environment for you, Councillor. We'll hand out some pens and we'll go from there.
Just on the back wall there, I think. So we'll stand up, stretch your legs.
Yep.
Yep.
You've got Sandy and Vita there.
Sorry, Councillor Free, did you have a question?
Yeah. So the assumptions about carrying capacity down the Golden Mile assume that all the buses are fully loaded.
I think, is that bit coming next?
Comes later, Sarah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the back there, Councillor, we've got effectively we've thrown the net over all of our policy settings currently, and any other things that we think should be in scope of the plan. And so now is an opportunity for you to have a look at them, agree or not, and add stuff.
And further on in this session, we're going to be talking about the Golden Mile capacity
then we've
specifically.
got Tim to talk about that. As I set out earlier, Tim will talk about the Golden Mile capacity numbers. It was a big question asked when we first kicked off this work. It was, why now? And so I asked the Greater Wellington Regional Council to go and demonstrate why now, and that's what Tim's going to come and report back to. And then, of course, we're going to close with Tamsin Evans just talking a little bit about the Harbour Quays project and the Eastern Connections busway projects.
Yes, but
Use the mic.
Use the mic, though.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm giving boring instructions on the mic. So the red dots are components. They're all up on the wall there, so you can walk along. We've tried to summarise at a very high level about what these are. Red is that you think it should be out of scope, red dot. Yellow dot is it should be a minor component. We didn't have something for a dot for in between, but so in between there are the yellow post-its. And then green dots is it should be a major component. And then there's, as Sean said, some post-its. If there's other things you want, there's also a page up there that is says other, and you can just write it on. But yeah, if you can use your dot colours, because we're going to use this to inform us going forward.
And we've got about 10, 15 minutes for this exercise?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you.
People
Oh, we'll just, I think Councillor Free is probably, you. Just wait. Uno momento. Thanks, Sarah. Back to you, Sean.
So, thank you very much, councillors. What we will do is collate this feedback, and we'll be using it to inform a paper that will be coming to you, I think it's next month. And in that will be a draft scope for a Wellington City Transport Plan. Look for your approval before it goes on to any work programs. So thank you. And
Great, thank you, Sean. That's good. I'm going to invite Tim Shackleton now. Tim, if you wanted to come up, I think it should just flow straight into your presentation. Bonnie, you're joining us as well? Great. Okay, a few more faces I don't recognise, so perhaps just introduce Tim if you can. The clicker's just in front of you there.
Thank you, Liam, and kia ora koutou councillors. Today we've got a few people from Greater Wellington. We've got Toby Pretorius from Tonkin and Taylor. We're very lucky to have Toby here with us. Toby's worked in both South Africa and for Transport in London on bus prioritisation, and he helped put together the work that you see in front of us today. I think everybody is familiar with Alex Campbell, who's our Principal Advisor for Public Transport Planning, and we have Bonnie Parfitt, who's our Senior Manager, Networking Customer. And we have David Boyd, who's our Manager of Customer Experience online. So there's two presentations that we've got today. The first one is looking at the future Golden Mile bus capacity, which was requested of us a couple of months ago. And we have a second presentation that's looking at some of the options in terms of harbour keys, or what we call a second spine bus prioritisation. In terms of process, just see if the clicker works. That's a very good presentation by Sean, by the way. I enjoyed that. The clicker seems to not be working. Does anyone want to click for us? Oh, there we go. It's a bit of a delay. I think we're there, Liam, so we're good. So those are the two presentations we're looking at today. The first one we'll look at is the future bus capacity. So this is not looking at the capacity as it currently exists on the Golden Mile. It's looking at the new Golden Mile designs. So essentially, we've had Toby and the Wellington Analytics Unit, led by Andrew Ford, do some modelling on our corridor capacity. And we've identified some sort of key findings from the available capacity on the Golden Mile. So probably just jumping straight ahead, probably the biggest finding for us as Greater Wellington has been, we believe that the maximum capacity on the Golden Mile is around 130 buses per hour at peak times. And we believe that we are heading towards peak capacity by 2028, 2029. So in 4 or 5 years, we'll essentially be at a place where we don't believe we can get any more buses down the existing Golden Mile. What the modelling did show us is that the saturation point occurs in about 5 years' time, and at which point essentially buses will be bumper to bumper. So we'll get to a stage where at the moment it's quite slow. The average travel speed is about 8 kilometres per hour. In about 3 to 4 years' time, that will start dropping down to essentially walking speed. So all these figures are based on our current LTP forecasts. So these are the buses and bus routes we need to put down, and we believe that in the range of 70 to 80,000 journeys per day, obviously we'll be heading into that speed range. So I won't go into too much detail around the findings, but just a few reflections from my perspective. The Golden Mile is quite a short stretch of road. It's only 2 kilometres long, or just over 2 kilometres. And we're obviously very concerned in terms about the performance and the speed of the Golden Mile, given that we do have 70,000 journeys down there a day. And we've looked at a number of options to obviously increase that capacity, but we don't believe there's much we can do due to a number of bottlenecks and constraints, which we will obviously, Alex and Bonnie will take us through. So one of the things that we're here today to talk to the councillors about, and we'd like the councillors to give us some advice on, is what is the counterfactual if we don't do a second spine, and please understand what the performance was likely to be in the next 3 to 4 years, because we're open to suggestions, but at the same time, we think we're at a point where we probably need to make a decision. So without going on too long, I will pass on to Bonnie and Alex to talk about the performance of the modelling and a few of the key conclusions. Yeah, you can start.
Thank you, Tim. Kia ora, councillors. So I probably can't talk to the modelling details. I'll let Toby talk specifically to that, but we did look at various scenarios. I think there's probably what's more important is to just, if we can skip to the next slide, if we can just find where we are. So just, I think some of these key points that we want to make. Happy to talk about the modelling in more detail as well. Toby and Andy are here for that part of the discussion. But the key points we want to make is that firstly, we are in a situation where the current bus speeds and the operations are well below international benchmarks for what we should expect in a corridor such as this in the city centre. For us, that is really challenging because we are attempting to run a very efficient bus operation, and we hear from our customers on a regular basis about their desire to have faster journeys, more reliable journeys, and we also hear from customers about wanting more frequent journeys and more capacity. And the reality is that with the current constraints of the corridor, we're not able to provide this. And as Tim said, we'll reach saturation point very soon, which means we are looking to work out how can we provide more space and where is the space available to put buses so that we can keep improving our services for our customers. I don't know if you want to click along. Look, it's moving very well now. So we have done a lot of work ourselves as Greater Wellington Regional Council in terms of looking at what the alternatives are. We can see pretty quickly that utilising the harbour quays will immediately improve some journey times, and in fact we already do use the harbour quays for some bus services, so it's important to note that we have already been using it. We use it for some school services and also the Hospital Express service, which we run a direct service between Wellington Station and to Wellington Hospital. For our customers using those services, we know there's a really strong value proposition, and that we also hear from them about the importance of those cross-town journeys to the hospital, to the airport, connecting the rail station to the rest of the city. Those things are quite important for our customers, and particularly what we do here is that a lot of people talk about when they get to Wellington Station, because our rail network doesn't extend through the city centre, that a lot of the time they choose to walk rather than catch a bus because it's just quicker, and that we just can't provide that level of service that they want. So often they end up walking and then catching another bus elsewhere. So those are the problems that we're faced with. We have thought a lot about where we can put buses and what services might move to different parts of our cities, recognising that what we're trying to do, and referring to the previous discussion, is create some kind of integrated plan and be cognisant of all the needs in the space, in the constrained space that we do have in our city. I think
Probably just one last thing. I think the outcome of the modelling was, so we have the factual and the counterfactual. The counterfactual is if we continue to use the Golden Mile, versus if we do put a second spine solution in place, the time saving is around 10 to 15 minutes. Which is considerable because it's only a 2-kilometre journey essentially. And I guess the concern is the value proposition for private car travel goes up immensely, but I think the key thing that we're worried about is the inability to add any additional capacity. So you've got a double whammy there. You've got slower journey speeds, which obviously encourage people to use private car, but then we've got the inability to add sufficient capacity through that stretch as well. So for our perspective, it's a little bit of a burning platform. We need a solution, and we're open to ideas, but I think think at this stage the second spine seems to be the most obvious one. And once again, a lot of this isn't for people necessarily journeying in and out of the city, it's for cross-town journeys. So there's destinations to the hospital, the airport, all that stuff is going to be 10 to 15 minutes slower if we don't intervene. So I think that's it from our presentation. We obviously have the people that did the report here and did the analysis, so happy to answer any questions.
Yes, the first one from Councillor Free.
Oh, thank you. I guess my first thought is there a better, just like with congestion charging or transferable tickets, is there a better way to use what we've already got? And that's why I asked the question before about how loaded, what sort of loadings do you have currently on the buses that are going down the Golden Mile? And is there the ability to make a few people transfer from at Courtenay Place, say, so that you're actually getting full buses going down the Golden Mile rather than sort of 2/3 full?
Yes, a good question. So trying to make the most of what we currently got and trying to optimise what we got. I think one of the key contextual things we've got to understand is we are currently at 106% or 6% above pre-COVID levels, and our growth forecast, particularly down the Golden Mile, are about twice ahead of where we thought we'd be 12 months ago. So we've seen a very strong rebound in patronage. So a lot of our services, particularly at peak periods, are already maxing out, and we're actually probably a little bit behind in terms of adding capacity. So I think in terms of what we can do from an existing occupancy standpoint, there are some challenges there, but in terms of optimising the stops, I might just pass that on to Alex.
Yeah, this goes back, there's a bit of history here. So if for anyone that remembers the bus catastrophe of 2018, those bus changes at their heart were to address, one of the factors in those bus changes was to address the capacity constraints of the Golden Mile. This issue was raised back in 2011. At that time, the advice we had from officers at Wellington City Council was that we needed to do everything we could to squeeze the capacity of that Golden Mile and show that we were using it fully and efficiently before looking to look at a second corridor. So the changes in 2018 looked to rationalise the network, reduce the number of routes coming through the city, introduce high-capacity double-deck buses, also increase the usage of alternative termini at the edges of the city, such as buses terminating at Courtenay Place, terminating at Wellington Station, coming in via the terrace, and increasing the use of Brandon Street. So those changes brought the bus numbers from 120 per hour prior to 2018, when we used to have queues of 8 or 9 buses at 5 o'clock trying to get down Manners Street. Brought that number down to about 80. It bought us some time. However, what we've seen is over the time since then, we've gone from 80 and gradually back up to about 95, 96 per hour, and we'll be over 100 by next year, based on our current growth that we're experiencing. And obviously, some of those changes, like increasing hubbing, were incredibly unpopular with our customers, and so to give our customers what we want, we have actually had to put some services back into the Golden Mile to meet what our customers are asking for.
Yes. No, have you got another one? Go for it.
Yeah, I suppose, yes, hubbing was not popular, but people, I think, accept one change. What residents that in my area didn't like was having to do it twice. But yeah, my question, I think, is about the ones, the buses from the Hut that actually come right through the Golden Mile up to Courtenay Place. And I would say people on trains have to get off at the station and catch a bus. Why couldn't we, for example, would it make a difference if we didn't have that service continuing up to Courtenay Place? And do you have any data about how many people are actually continuing on that bus from the station point up to the Courtenay Place point?
So I guess a bit of history there is when we used to have a number of services from the northern suburbs of the city, such as up in the Newlands area, other areas that used to terminate up around the railway station and Brandon Street end of the city. I know from memory when the Newlands services were extended around 2000, I don't know the exact year, but I understand there was a 40% increase in usage of those buses because of the convenience of being able to travel through the city. And certainly when we were testing with customers in Karori for 2018, where we did cut back the Karori West and Karori South buses to terminate at Brandon Street, a number of customers did vote with their feet, and so we ended up with the Route 2s getting
overloaded, while the Route 33s and 34s that's terminated at Brandon Street weren't as well utilised as ideally they would be.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pannett.
I love the hut bus going to Courtney Place, and I will oppose it. So it's very good. 2 questions. One, do you have any idea about costs around this yet?
It's, perhaps we can cover that in the next presentation. We can give some indicative pricing. I think that there's obviously been an interim arrangement which we can possibly put in place, which gives us time to consider a variety of other options and other transport plans and projects, and then the permanent solution will probably be significantly more expensive, but perhaps TAMS and Invita can cover that in the next presentation.
Okay, well, you'd have my strong support for doing this. In fact, we should have done it a lot longer, but you know, we're getting to a crisis point. My question, though, is that given the city has mucked around light rail since the 90s, wouldn't this still be a better solution than buses which don't have as high capacity? Is that your opinion?
Look, I think so. What we're trying to do, I mean, in any case, what we're talking about here is potentially having multiple corridors to accommodate in the future, maybe another public transport mode. We don't want to discount that. Certainly, it depends very much on how much capacity is required, which comes to the growth of the city. So there's a lot of interconnected factors that will determine what we need in the future. But our need is quite pressing, and we're quite focused on that at this point and not precluding anything in the future.
Sorry, can I just, that capacity issue, wouldn't, if we've got a good environmentally friendly city, shouldn't most people be catching the bus or the train, walking or cycling? And obviously we've got to get the housing settings right. So have you got some idea, I mean, apart from every Wellingtonian, have you got some projections about how much you might need be able to scale it up so that we've got more people using those modes?
We have some work we've done with the Wellington Analytics Unit about private car share and use of public transport. It has shown that we do actually have more people travelling into the city using public transport currently than private car, which is the risk. Essentially, if we stop adding capacity on public transport, it gives you a very clear direction in terms of where that mode of travel needs to head. We can certainly provide some more information in that regard if we want the details.
Councillor Randall.
Thank you. I'm a huge bus advocate, and I was also the mover of the notice of motion under which this work's being done. My question is, how much would it cost to fix the bottlenecks that's holding back the expanded capacity?
Thank you, Councillor, and I'm not sure if Liam wants to step in here. He's shaking his head at me, so...
No, was I shaking? I think the answer here is we haven't got the cost outside of the fact that that option on Willis in particular, Manners, is a thermonuclear one. We would be extremely expensive. And as you've really articulately put, this is actually to relieve existing pressure. And there are viable options otherwise which are way more cost effective.
Thanks.
And it may be worth just getting Toby to comment on the constraints are wider than just Willis Street. There's a number of bottleneck issues.
Kia ora koutou. Sorry, I thought I got away with that one. So the bottleneck is really almost half the corridor. It's about 930 metres. It's the southern end of Lambton Quay, Willis, and obviously Manners Street. So you've got, extensive curb realignment. You've got canopy changes because of the double-decker buses. And then not even to mention the effect on the footways. If you take some of the space, it's already very busy in the mornings. And some of the issues that we have with the buses at the moment are related to the busy sidewalks next to the bus stops, where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic already and people waiting to get on and off the bus, and so your dwell times are affected by that. So it's not only Lambton Quay, it's about half the corridor that's a bottleneck.
Yes. So I know it's a lot of money. Tim, you said you're open to suggestions about how we don't have to do the spine. I mean, I would suggest to you, until you know the cost of actually fixing the bottlenecks, then you really can't say that it's too expensive.
So that's sort of not really a question.
Can I answer this? Well, it's not really a question, but I will just make a comment.
Yes, thank you.
So there is an approved plan to upgrade the Golden Mile, which has been approved by this council and is in play. So any further improvements or changes would have to go through the appropriate process.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's, thank you, Siobhan, thank you, that is a valid comment. But also, officers were instructed through the notice of motion that had the support of the majority of elected members to go and look at bus capacity options to improve the bus capacity. And there is an option that has not yet been explored, which is the costly option of fixing the bottleneck.
I mean, you're making a speech, councillor.
No, but no, sorry. With all due respect, Tim did invite, he said he was open to suggestions, and he did come here to say, he'd love to hear suggestions. I'm just giving him some feedback on that comment.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think this is one of the things that you need to do. You need to work out what the counterfactual is, or what your next best alternative is. I think in addition to all the interventions that Tony mentioned, we believe there's a number of locations, and we do have a slide that we can provide to you, that the corridor is just simply too narrow. So without completely removing the footpath, we're talking about building removal. So once we kind of got to that point, we kind of stopped doing costings because we realised there was no interventions that we could make through conventional roading corridor changes.
I think you're being told, councillor, that option is not practicable.
And I just think
it has been looked at.
And we have looked at it. We can provide some slides to that effect. There was 4 locations where we believe that the footpath would be insufficient and the roading corridor is too narrow, that we'd be looking at potentially building removal to be able to have a footpath and to have a second busway. So that was one of the points. The other one is obviously the minister's statements that we're very cognizant of, who said that we weren't making any more interventions to the Golden Mile because that could potentially jeopardise funding. So I think we're cognizant of that as well. But I think from our perspective, some of those roading corridor changes were so significant, I don't think we would have been able to do the work around the costings. It would have been quite a complex piece of work.
Councillor Calvert, have you got a question online?
Yes, I've got a couple.
Sure.
First up, and there's probably more comments, but I don't know why where it's come from that the Golden Mile is sacrosanct. So
you are moving into speeches as well, councillor. If you
no, I'm not.
I'm
not, because it's something that hasn't been covered off.
Councillor, if you would just ask a question, that would be great. Thank you.
So I don't think that's well. Then we really need a time to provide some comments, because I could reframe it as a question. So why is the Golden Mile seem to be sacrosanct to officers? That's my first question. My second question is, you talk about 10 to 15 minutes extra travelling time by bus, but have you factored into this where people are coming from or going to? Because whilst they may be working on the terrace, so taking an extra 10 minutes for a bus route, how does that impact on that? And I'm not hearing that in the presentation. I'm also not hearing anything about the capacity for the number of buses, because we know that more buses requires more investment, and I'm not hearing of any extra investment of any significant amount in the bus network. Okay, we've heard comments about trains previously.
Okay, councillor.
And I'm
let's hang on, councillor. Let's just have one question at a time and get it answered. So the first one being about the Golden Mile.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the language about being sacrosanct. It's gone through this council a number of times. It's been approved by this council. It's in a long-term plan for delivery, and officers are delivering it as per your instructions.
But we could still change it, though, couldn't we, if we wanted to?
We're not having back and forth, councillor. The second question was about where the people are coming from.
Whether it's been factored in. My other question hasn't been answered correctly, but I will go back on that as well.
Councillor. So the question about where people are coming from, Tim, thank you.
Okay, I can do the investment question. So our LTP has 100 additional buses, which is a bit of a 25 to 30% increase in our fleet size in the next 5 to 6 years. And the growth forecasts, as we mentioned before, are well above our expectations. In fact, we're struggling a little bit to keep up. So I think that investment in terms of the bus services is there, and we do have sufficient money in our LTPs to provide that capacity. In terms of where people are coming from, I might put Alex on the spot.
Yeah, so we're talking every bus route that's coming through the city. So when we talk about that additional travel time, if your bus is coming in one end of the Golden Mile and going the full length of the Golden Mile, then we're adding, Toby, if you just quote the number for me, the additional travel time.
Oh, at the moment it takes 15 minutes to do 2 kilometres.
But the amount that will go up to...
28 minutes, I think, was the worst case scenario. 28 minutes, so to do 2 kilometres sounds kind of ridiculous, doesn't it?
And that number kicks in once we get up, as we get closer to 130 buses per hour. Those buses are getting slower and slower down to sort of 3 to 6 kilometres per hour. Once we reach 130 buses per hour, according to the modelling, the Golden Mile capacity caps out and buses start queuing back beyond the Golden Mile. So buses actually have to queue on Cambridge Terrace, queue them back to the railway station to even get into the Golden Mile. So you have a conga line of buses effectively along the length of the Golden Mile.
Yeah, look, I can understand the travel
I'm going to
time.
Councillor Free now. I can put you back on the list. Councillor Free,
Thank you. But you gave much more time to Councillor Free to
Councillor
start with, I'm
Calvert,
afraid.
I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Councillor
I'll
Free.
deal with this separately. Your chairing is abominable. That's all I can say.
Councillor Calvert, that is completely unnecessary and unhelpful. Thank you. Councillor Free.
It's true. Yeah,
Uncalled for behaviour. Thank you, Councillor Calvert.
All right, just to ask my question, I am quite interested in the numbers. Look, I don't want to be too nitpicky, but we are being asked on behalf of ratepayers, to invest, and I want to be really confident that, that I sort of understand what you've put in front of us, which I think I do. So is it possible for us to have the data, like, the loadings of, say, a few key routes and how that pattern changes through the Golden Mile? Like, whether how many people get on and off and what sort of numbers have you got? Yeah.
We certainly have the raw data. It's a matter of the request, and we can extract data to answer the question.
I'll think about what I actually want to know, and I'll email you. Because the other thing, I guess.
Oh, actually, Thomas could make a comment.
Yeah.
Just on that question about who gets on where. There's a really cool map that I saw that somebody made for Auckland Transport, which has the rail network in Auckland plus the main bus routes in Auckland, and it has the number of passengers who board at each stop. And so we're getting one of those made. So we'll have that for you, I would say, maybe in the next couple of weeks.
That would be useful, especially for the hut buses. And, I think everybody has to do a little bit of sometimes making some sacrifices around convenience. But the thing I really wanted to raise was the cost. We're, like you, hearing a lot from our ratepayers about affordability. How are we going to fund this? Because also bus fares are getting. I heard from Councillor Pannett, she's been spending a lot of money on the buses because she takes them a lot, and she's really noticed the increase in the fares. I'm sure she would say the same. How are we really going to deliver a value proposition, and how much can we expect Wellington ratepayers to pay for the carriageway? When you look at the trains, central government is funding a lot of the tracks and the actual network for that system to run on. If we're going to run a serious public transport system, it's going to cost a lot of money. How can we lobby government to fund it a little bit more?
That's a very good question. I was hoping both Wellington City Council and ourselves are waiting on our National Land Transport funding outcomes, which include this project. However, I would like to note that we have a joint partnership that is forming between Greater Wellington and Wellington City Council, which will mean that we will both pay half of the roading corridor changes. So we are prepared to put some money from our LTP, and we'll do a 50-50 approach to roading corridor changes, which in the past may have been more a Wellington City Council cost. So I think this is a relatively good deal, and I think, as you're aware, councillors, this project was budgeted for as part of your long-term plan, and it was budgeted for as part of our long-term plan. The wider question of lobbying central government is a very, very good one, and I think this is something that we need a joined-up approach on. I believe that the government has signalled in the government policy statement, GPS for Transport, that they would like to see rapid transit corridors developed across major metropolitan centres, and that includes us. So I would like to say, if we don't get this funding, and I'm told we're going to get notification at 6 p.m. tonight, but I've been told that twice already, different times, I think we should send a pretty strong message that this is obviously, from an economic perspective, a travel time perspective, and obviously a social outcomes perspective, these are the kind of projects that we need to be doing.
Okay.
Councillor Chung, I believe you have a question online.
Yes, I've actually got 4 questions. So if you want me to ask 2 or 3 first, then I can do that and go back on the list.
Okay,
but some of these,
just go. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So some of these questions may have already been answered partially. I'm referring to the Harbour Quay route. Do you envisage having the? You're talking about people coming in from the Hutt and different places. So are you envisaging those routes going along the Harbour Quays, but not the other routes that are going through the city? And so would you be able to actually run that route without stopping, without any stops there? If they're heading off to the hospital and places further south, would they actually need stops there?
Thank you, Councillor. So at this stage, our preliminary work, we haven't determined exactly which routes, but we have done some work with our customers, and we think that in terms of what might be, because we have to balance the need of some people having to walk a longer distance to where they might be going, and that value proposition and that travel time saving, what we think might be appropriate is, yes, possibly some regional routes, but most likely some express routes. We do need to do the numbers to work out how many buses we could actually move, and then we'll go from there in terms of determining what actual routes. But we have to keep in mind what will be best for our customers.
Yep. Okay. So that was actually, that's good, because you've just answered my second question, which was the support for the Harbour Quays route. The next question was, some time ago, the minister said that he's quite happy for the Golden Mile to go ahead, but he wanted it done cheaper, but without any substantial changes. So is that when they talk about material changes, what does that actually mean? So what's the chances of making enough changes so that NZTA would say, no, hang on, that's not material, that's a whole lot of things. Do you have a definition for what they mean?
Yes, I can answer that, Councillor Chung. It's Siobhan here. Yep. It's a change in scope, and a change in scope is defined at any change that you make that then impacts on the benefits that you're delivering. So we haven't made any of those changes to the Golden Mile, which would impact the benefits. As soon as you made a change of that nature, you would need to then go back and reassess it under a new investment methodology, which is guided by their new GPS.
Okay, great, thanks. And my last question, which has also been partially answered, is that if you have a route where someone is coming in and take the Harbour Quay route, but they work up on the terrace, and so they allow an extra, say, 10 minutes to walk from the Harbour Quay stops to the terrace, would you need to do some study into that before you actually do them? Because you'd need to know exactly where people wanted to go to know which routes to use down there, wouldn't you?
So I think it's less about that. So one thing that we have tested with our public transport advisory group and and we've done some customer focus around this, is actually there are some very quick and short walking routes from the terrace to the quays. And so actually, in terms of the value proposition for those customers wanting to take those express trips, as long as they know that their journey will be quicker, there's a willingness to walk. So we've got to balance those things in terms of which services we move and where. And also we do have quite good cross Wellington City connection on the terrace now with the Route 4 and the changes that we've made to those services, including the 22 and the 18. So we're quite confident that people will have a range of options as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Nice to hear you.
Yep, thanks.
Councillor Calvert, did you have more questions?
They'll keep. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Councillor Pannett.
One question. When you look at costs, do you consider other costs, non-financial ones, like, air pollution?
Thank you, Councillor. I think we'll have a business case, which is something that's currently being worked up at the moment, that will quantify the various costs and the benefits of the Harbour Quays approach. But you're correct to think you can quantify air pollution, and you can quantify travel time savings, and you can quantify variability and journey speed as well. So these are quite measurable items that we will include in the business case.
But you can't include, obviously it's a bit tricky, but the climate change impacts if we don't make a change over the long term?
I think we can. So for other public transport projects, we have translated that into equivalent tonnes of carbon, and we also do look at the health benefits of improved public transport, particularly along the Golden Mile. In fact, I think we've got a council paper in the next month coming out at Greater Wellington along those lines about the health benefits of public transport.
That's awesome. Thanks very much.
Councillor Free.
Yeah, yes, there are health benefits because people walk a lot more when they catch public transport. I love catching the bus, so just a big thank you from me in the East, because our service now is so good, and it's reflected in lots of people using it, and I love catching the bus. Flexible tickets, just brilliant. But just getting back to the costs, because I'm also hearing, lots of concern about costs, GW costs as well. So I know Wellington regional ratepayers do subsidise willingly, I'm sure, lots of regional projects. Are you talking about when you say half the cost would come from the regional council? Would that be a general rate? So other ratepayers in other parts of the region would be helping pay for this improvement? Yeah, thank you. I like to think that there's a two-way flow here, when it's needed. Yeah, thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of questions for this section. Thank you, everyone. And now, Tamsin.
Yes, great. So thank you, councillors. Thanks for your questions. Just going to introduce Tamsin Evans. Now, Tamsin's going to run you through the Harbour Quays and Eastern Connections progress. And we can have a quick chat about that. If you recall the earlier diagram I showed you before, so Tamsin is the Program Director. She reports to me directly, but of course also reports to the steering group, and will provide us and stand up the team that will provide that steering group with advice on how the projects are progressing, and also in turn, of course, Luke and I providing advice to our respective councils about the progress. Over to you, Tamsin.
He Pākehā hau I heki oko tupuna I Waihangi e Piritini. Kaore oku marae he tangata tiriti ahau. London toku turanga waiwai kei pai kakariki koku kai I nai ko Tamsin ahau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone. I have, this is my second role with Wellington City Council. The last time I was here was 2005. And in between, I've worked at Kapiti Coast District Council for 10-something years and at Porirua City Council. So Councillor Pannett and I will recognise each other, but I'm afraid all the rest of you are new around the table to me. So if you could give me a couple of weeks to get up to speed with names and faces, that would be great. Thank you. So yes, Harbour Quays. That's the diagram that Liam showed you earlier. So as you can see, we're going to be running effectively 3 projects in my remit, Harbour Quays, the Eastern Connections and the City Transport Plan. And the purpose of my role is really to make sure we keep those projects on track and on time and delivering, but also to make sure we've got the connections made between those projects and other existing projects that are going on, Golden Mile being an absolutely obvious one, but other city centre projects and so on, taking that sort of citywide and network-wide approach. So I'm sure you're very familiar with some of this already, so my apologies if this is repetition, but that's obviously the Harbour Quays study area, which is, as you can see, nicely bounded by the Golden Mile. And I think Tim has probably, in GW's presentation, talked quite a bit about some of these benefits of bus priority, so I won't necessarily go through those, but you do have those slides for reference. So the two key points around why would we be doing this second spine, again, I think Tim has covered that, but the important point is about the saturation point with the Golden Mile. And he spoke about a burning platform, and there is an urgent need for that. So we are in the processes of getting this project up and running. In terms of the connections to the other projects, we're talking about Golden Mile, changes to the waterfront, and other projects with different lead parties, such as the tunnel, which is obviously New Zealand Waka Kotahi, and the projects that Greater Wellington is also working through in terms of strategic planning around bus routes and the integrated long-term concepts around their network, and obviously the rapid transit point as well. So down to the nitty-gritty. We are talking about doing this project as two phases, with the first phase being that interim project that you can see on the top line there in the lighter green. In the long-term plan, Councillor, you have about $51 million budgeted for the whole project, and we will come back as we go through the process with better sense of cost for the interim stage, but at the moment we're looking at something round about $7 million. But I emphasise that's not proven yet, so that's just a really rough ballpark figure where we are now. The idea being that we can do this interim project without delivering the full solution along the whole corridor, which will then allow us to demonstrate that the second spine has value in terms of journey time and customer experience, that we can look at how we can test the network in terms of loading on the buses, and as you just were talking about, in terms of access to the second spine depending on the type of journey. So we can do this without building the whole scheme and still get a really good understanding of what those benefits are. In terms of the options that we've been looking at, these are the two that are currently emerging as the top two. On the left-hand side, you can see the one where the blue line is southbound, and the green line along the quay is northbound. Obviously, that has an implication for Featherston Street, using that to bring the buses in one direction. And the second option would be to run both the northbound and southbound routes along the harbour quays themselves. As Tim mentioned, we'll be testing those through the business case to identify which one has the greater merit. In our rough timeframes for what we're looking at the moment, obviously we're right on the first item there in terms of the National Land Transport Plan, and waiting, all of us, in detail for the numbers and what they mean for this particular project. We're working through getting the business case and design consultants engaged, with the expectation early next year we can be finalising design and getting construction underway, with the expectation of having this operational in 2026. I can stop there for questions on Harbour Quays, or just... Okay, all right, just one more slide. So Eastern Connections, we are a little bit behind on getting, not behind, we haven't established the team for this project yet. This is my third week, and I haven't quite got to that one. But in the context of the partnership around these projects, I am having a first meeting with Greater Wellington on Thursday to look at what that combined approach will be. So I expect this will follow pretty much the same pattern as Harbour Quays, in terms of both councils' officers working together and looking for the benefits for the city and for the region that we're looking for, and the network. So, yep, we will get a project team established and a project brief, and this will follow the same usual process.
All right, I do have some questions now, the first one being from Councillor Free.
Yeah, so eastern suburbs at peak times in the morning, it can take 50 minutes on the bus, which is not competitive with the car. A car takes quite a while, but bus is not competitive. So for a long time, I've been thinking we should have express bus lanes on Cobham Drive. There's lots and lots. It's very wide, and there's only 2 lanes in that whole width. Is that going to be in scope?
We haven't got the scope developed yet.
Oh, okay.
But this is
because
input to help us develop.
Yeah, like
yes.
it seems a no-brainer to me, but.
Thank you, Councillor. We actually, it's not obviously the scopes to be defined, but there were a number of various interventions that were identified through Let's Get Wellington Moving. So we are very conscious there are a number of quick wins and there are some longer term solutions along that corridor. So we won't be starting from scratch. There are some definite immediate opportunities out to the east of Miramar.
And it's just about the express buses, which continue on Cobham Drive, that don't actually go through Kilburnie. Is it possible to put in scope an express bus lane on the second part of Cobham Drive, as well as the green that you've shown there at the minute? Because the express buses don't all go through Kilburnie. Some of them want to go really express and stay on Cobham Drive and turn at Wellington Road.
I guess that's really another level down in terms of looking at the detailed interventions.
I think it's quite high level myself.
All right. I'm conscious we're nearly out of time. Councillor Pannett.
Sorry, so I heard you correctly when you said it could be operational by 2026. That is amazing for local government. That's fantastic. So how much? Yeah. So how much actual work is required in terms of roadworks? Is it just putting markings on roads?
Yeah, it's not extensive civil works for the interim stage. There is work obviously around establishing the bus shelters for the stops and the power that's then needed for the real-time information. But yeah, essentially, it's a very low level of work in the road corridor.
That's fantastic. And can we get our bus stops back if you get that and on the Golden Mile? Because you're taking away our bus stops.
I think we'll move on to the questions from Councillor Randall. Councillor Randall.
I'm with you, Councillor Pennant. My question is a couple of questions. First of all, given the growth is happening across the city, but especially to the north and the west, why is there an emphasis of doing a bus priority to the east?
Good question. So Tonkin and Taylor, as part of our bus priority action plan review, has just undertaken a study around journey time variability and congestion across the city. And the corridor that is actually coming out the worst performing is out to Miramar. There's very high variability in terms of travel times. And we're seeing, up to 10, 15, 20 minutes variability depending on peak and off peak. So we believe bus prioritisation will have quite significant travel time benefits. There's also quite a lot of growth out to the north, and that is not out of scope. As part of the wider bus priority action plan, we are taking a full regional view. So we'll be working with Hutt City Council, we'll be working with Porirua City Council, and the end product will be an integrated network of bus corridors that ideally interconnect, so you get to maximise those travel time savings. And this is why there's quite strong synergies between the eastern connections and the Second Spine Harbour Quays, because if they connect up, then obviously you get a much quicker journey for everybody from Miramar.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is really about the Harbour Quays. So thank you for outlining the options that are being explored. When are we going to have more definitive information about the cost of each option, the traffic modelling impact of each option, and impacts on things like car parking loss and things like that?
So just back on the indicative timeline there, Councillor, the business case is going to be worked on towards through the rest of this year. So early 2025, we'll have a really good understanding of what the impacts will be.
Thomas, did you?
Yeah, I was going to say, just on the bus stops point. So one of the things I've seen, so we kind of think about the Golden Mile and the Second Spine as part of a kind of one project really for us from a public transport point of view in terms of getting through the city. And so one of the things I know we're working on and hopefully we can get soon, it obviously depends on what is decided for the actual route for the Second Spine, but one of the things we will have soon hopefully is a map of all of the bus stops serving the central city and what shelter we're expecting. And that map will show that versus what we have now, there will be a significant increase in bus stops and bus shelters serving more destinations and more people than we have now, which I think is getting lost a bit in the discussion around one or two stops being moved from the Golden Mile.
I actually don't want to get into a big conversation about bus stops now, and we are out of time. So I would like to thank everybody for your participation this afternoon. Thank you, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Cheers.